Okay, in this next video, what I want to do is build on that last example that we had in the last two videos. And the primary thing I want to do is focus on making the database a little bit more real. So I'm going to create that as a service, and then we'll implement that or provide it as a ZLayer. I also want to note that I created this code off of an earlier version of the last example, so you're going to see some things down here in the code below that are a little rough. So I thought about fixing all those, and then I thought it would be even better just to leave those as an exercise for the reader, because since I'm talking about this, let me scroll down here. What I did was I have this make routes function, and rather than create all these routes here as individual values, what I did was I left their definition inside of the routes constructor here. So what I'm talking about is I would pull this route out and make it a value. I would pull this route out, make it a value, this one, and also this one here, pull all those out and make them values like I did in the previous video. So I haven't done that, so that is an exercise for the reader, or in this case, the viewer. I note here that after this, things you want to do in the real world would be to add validation and add logging. I am still not doing validation, but I do start showing logging. And so when we get down to the delete route, I'll show a little bit of logging using the ZIO tap method and the ZIO.log functions. And you'll see that in just a few moments. Okay, and since the functionality of this code is basically the same as it was in the previous videos, these curl commands I believe are going to be exactly the same, and yes, I do believe they are all exactly the same. What changes is right after the case class. So this should be the same to-do case class we had in the previous videos. And now what's different is I'm creating our database, our mock database, as a service. And you've seen this type of thing in previous videos, so I'm going to go through it relatively quickly, but I'll try to point out the important parts. So anytime you create a service, you're going to start with a trait like this. And then what you do is, since I'm defining an interface for my to-do repository, and again, the repository could be a database or any other type of data store, but you start by defining an interface and you say, well, what I'm going to want is I want a get all function inside of there, and it's going to have this type signature. And then I'm going to want a get function and a create function and a delete function. So you start sketching these function interfaces. And in Scala, when you do that, you give each function a name, of course, like this. Then you define the parameters that each function will take, like ID of string, to do, and then ID of string here. And you also define these return types, such as this one right here, this task of a map. And the thing I want to note here is that I specifically use task because anytime you access a data store, I'm going to assume that the data store or database is running on a different server than our code is running on. So you have a possibility for network error. You have a possibility that that server is down. So to me, it's much more of a real world thing to say that this is going to be a task here. And that means that accessing that remote server can fail. So that's why all four of these are tasks in these cases, because I believe that's a much more real world implementation of how a database or data store is going to work. So again, this part here is the interface, and then what you do when you're creating a service is you can have multiple implementations of that interface. So here I have a dev to-do repository. This is for the dev environment, and then of course you could have another repository for a test environment and another repository for production. So this one is for a development environment. I've shown before that you can implement an interface like this one up here as an object or a class. And the reason I do this one as a class is because each of these functions down here is going to need access to this ref. So I'm still using the ref in this video, this ZIO ref right here. I'm still using that and wrapping it around a map. And therefore, each of these functions, as you can see here, here, and here, each of those functions is going to need access to that ref. So that's why this is a class and not an object. So I can pass the ref in here when I construct this. And then the dev to-do repository extends the to-do repository, which again is that interface. When you have a test to-do repository and a production to-do repository, those will also extend the to-do repository and implement these methods differently for each of those environments. So this is just the way that I implement these for the dev environment. And again, in the dev environment, we're using a ref wrapped around a map, just like in the previous video. So in the code here, such as this getAll method, you can see that what I do is I call ref.get. And before I leave this function, I wanted to say that when you do ref.get, you're saying get whatever is inside the ref. So what's inside the ref is this map. So that's what is returned by that function right there. Then in the next function here is called get. You pass in an ID of string. It's going to return a task of an option of a to-do. So what goes on here is you say, well, I want to get the map right here. Then I would call the map method on it. And then on that map, I want to try to get that ID. So again, this could be map like that. That's the exact same thing as using that underscore. So if that's a little bit easier, that's what that is. So you're saying, look inside this map right here and try to get something with this key, right? The ID that's being passed in is something like 1 or 2. So that's saying, try to find that key inside that map. If it finds one, it's going to return a sum of a to-do right here. And if it fails, this part here is going to be a none. And that's the typical way that works. And the only other thing I'll show for clarity is to hover right there, and you can see again that that map, lowercase map, is this map of string and to-do that we've been working with in the past videos. The next function is called create. We pass in a to-do item to it. It's going to return a task of a unit right there. So then this code here will be the same as what I did in the previous videos. Remember that we're working with a ref, and that ref contains a map. So we're saying what I want to do is update that map. So then this code inside of here is just saying, what I want to do is take the existing map and then add this new key value pair to it. So again, the ID is the key, and the to-do element or the to-do value is the value that corresponds to that key. So that's what that's saying right there. And that syntax could also be written as map greater than like that. So next up we have delete. It takes an ID as a string. It's going to return a task of a Boolean. So the Boolean is going to be whether the delete succeeded or not. And again, I covered this in the previous video. So the idea is this says I want the list of to-do items. I want that map. And then I want to remove an element from that map based on this key or this ID that's passed in as a key. So this part, again, right here that I mentioned in the previous videos, this is the way you subtract a key value pair out of an existing map. And then what that'll give us over here is a potentially new map. And then I did the found part, so that's the Boolean. And then we return the Boolean here and the new map right here. And recall what I mentioned in the previous video, even though I'm returning a tuple right here, what I'm returning that tuple to is the modify method right there. So this tuple is going back to the modify method of the ref. And the way that works is the new to-dos becomes the new map inside the ref, and then this found Boolean is what becomes the value right here. So that's the way that works. And again, I went through that relatively quickly because I did cover that in the previous videos. And now another thing that's new here is this was the class dev-to-do-repository. Here I create a companion object named dev-to-do-repository. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to create a ZLayer value right here that can be accessed later in the code. So what I'm doing is I'm saying I want to create a value as a ZLayer for dependency injection. And I have the note, see program.provide later in the code. So if we go down to the bottom here, we could see what I'm doing here in program.provide is I'm providing this ZLayer. So that's the dev-to-do repository live. So if I click on that, that is this code that I was just about to show you, this value. So again, live is going to be a ZLayer. It's going to have this type of any, nothing, and a to-do repository as the success value. The way I'm creating it is with ZLayer dot from ZIO. And I don't remember if I've shown this part before in the videos, but ZLayer dot from ZIO converts a ZIO effect into a ZLayer. So that's what I'm doing in this code right here is I'm converting a ZIO effect, this ref right here, into a ZLayer value, which is going to be what live is in the end. So inside of here we have ref.make, as I mentioned in the previous videos. This is the way you create a new ref. And what I'm doing in this code right here is I'm saying I want to create a new ref. It's going to contain this empty map, and the map is going to have this type where the keys are going to be string values and the values are going to be to-do values. So this line right here creates that ref that contains the map, uppercase map. Then I call lowercase map on that. And that allows me to take our ref and then create a new to-do repository from it right here. And if it helps to break that down into 2 lines of code, I can do that. So This one would be val ref equals ref.make, because again, we're creating a ref right here. So you can see that's a ref and it has this type right there. And now that I have this ref value right there, I can say I want to call map on it and then do everything that I did before. And the purpose of this is it's going to transform this reference into a new instance of the to-do repository. And again, this to-do repository is referring to the class. I'm saying I want a new instance of the to-do repository class. And as you can see right here, I'm passing in the ref into that. And that's what this code is doing right here. So this ref right here is this constructor argument right here to this class. That's the way that works. So when this code is finished, all of that code right there, it's going to create this new dev to do repository instance. And that's why that's the success value right here in that ZLayer right there. And then the only other thing to say, again, this was creating that live value inside of our object, and that was what's coming into program.provide right here, is this one right here. We're saying that for this particular code, we want to use an instance of our dev repository. So if I had had another instance of a test repository, I could provide that in our test code. And if I had a production one, I could have a production to-do repository right there. But in our case, we only have the dev to-do repository. So that's the way we're providing this dependency for our current application. And that's what ZLayers are all about, is creating dependencies like this and then using them in program.provide, as I showed down there below.